Hello. Yeah, so this is normally the slot that Richard would probably be doing, but as Richard isn't here, it's going to be Flemming and myself who are going to share this, and it's really just a general update on projects that we're working on. Some of it we're covering here, other projects are covered in tomorrow's operations update. First part really, well, network availability stays high. We haven't really seen anything major, knock on wood if there's any here, which is good, which is how we want the networks to behave. We've moved the more details about that into the operations update for tomorrow. 100 gig port growth stays actually, after it slowed down a little bit during the mid-year, it stays strong towards the end of the year. We're now at 150 100 gig ports which are connected across all of the networks, which is a reasonable number. For those who are interested, this is actually on LON1 where the ports are located, and the majority of them is really, it still hasn't really changed over time. It's the Telehouse sites, it's Slough, and it's Harbour Exchange where we see the majority of 100 gig demand. Again, this we'll cover in much more detail tomorrow. We are maybe running a little bit behind, but we're pretty much there. The maintenance has been scheduled for the end of this week. We're just going to bring the 100 gig upgrade for all of the sites on LINX Manchester. So more on that tomorrow. The other one, and I'm sure people might ask about it, so we started with prefix validation much earlier in the year. This is only based on really IRR data, so no RPKI yet. And probably some people might ask the recent issue that people have seen on our root servers and on many other places. Actually, RPKI wouldn't have made any difference there either. We haven't deployed it yet. We're continuing to look what the options are, and unfortunately it's quite limited these days what you actually can do in regards to useful validation. The only thing we could implement, and we could do it on Bird, is really just do a very basic origin validation where anything that's invalid we would reject. It would probably make a small difference, but it isn't the biggest gain there. But nevertheless, we're looking at that, which again I will cover a little bit more. One of the issues, this isn't as easy to do on our current Quagga branch, even though it'll be relatively straightforward on Bird. We're looking at our options. Come back to that in a second. And doing a full AS pass validation, really using RPKI at this point in time with the tool sets that are available out there, isn't really anything that's feasible, but really is what would be needed to make a significant difference. There's a number of other projects on the software side and on tools that we're using, just to mention one of them, and Curtis is going to talk about private VLAN. I'm going to talk more about private VLAN tomorrow, but that's one of the examples where we're starting to put a decent amount of effort into improving the functionality of the portal. We're slowly going to move all of the order forms over to the portal where they actually become a little bit more than just very basic static forms that we currently have as order forms, but actually present you with the data that is there, present you, if it's an upgrade to port, present you with a list of the ports. For private VLAN, it will give you the option to choose if you want to deliver it on an existing port, if yes, show you those ports. And at the same point, there are improvements that follow to make the portal, the stats part of the portal, more useful if you have multiple services, which is also true for connections partners, where the current very simplistic method doesn't give you a lot of detail. So a lot more to come on that side of things over the next weeks and months. Root server, I mentioned quickly, one of the main reasons, it's not the only reasons, but one of the main reasons that we're looking at Quagga again, everybody might know, so we're using what formerly was called the EuroIX branch of Quagga, which really I think we're the only one who's left using it. It is quite far away from anything that would be called mainline. It is reliable, but we're limited on what we can do with it. But we have started to look at what options are there. Really, the worst case scenario is we would run multiple instances of BERT, but if we can continue to run 2 different software versions, 2 different platforms, then that is our preferred solution. There's a lot of work that goes into OpenBGPD these recent months, so we're looking at that. We have been working for quite a while with Juniper on work they are doing in order to use Junos as a root server platform, and Corby is going to talk a bit about that in his slides that are, I think actually it's following after ours. So we're continuing to work with them in order to see if that is an option. And we're looking at all the other platforms which are out there and testing them in our test environment. The main issue really, most of them are valid platforms, but the scale of a root server, especially for LON1, there's really only very few platforms out there that work well if you have 600, 700, 800 sessions on root servers. So that's ongoing work, more on that probably on the February LINX meeting and follow on what's going to happen, what our decision's going to be. 2 other main projects that I'm going to mention that again, this is really just a very basic overview, going to go into much more details once we get closer to them in February and the following meetings. So the first one is Telehouse North2. We are historically in pretty much all of the buildings in all of the buildings in Telehouse, north, east, west, and to a limited degree North2. In most of them, we actually have multiple suites and isolated racks in a lot of places. It simply has historically grown like that over the past 15 years. The plan is to make use of available space in North2 and consolidate our existing space in pretty much Telehouse North and Telehouse North2 and move the members which are currently in West and in East and move them to those 2 sites. The same, we have a suite in Telehouse West where we have our OSS platform sitting. That also we're going to consolidate and move it into the same rack. The main goal really is reducing the overall costs that we have in Telehouse by consolidating it in fewer racks, consolidating some of the equipment we use, make better use of the space and power that we have. So all of that is going to start. Work is really, there's some dependencies on the plans that we have for LON1, which Flemming is going to talk about in a minute. So there's a number of dependencies that will impact the timelines, but we expect the work will start in Q1 and we'll obviously provide all the necessary updates once we're closer to them. And I think I pretty mentioned everything that's done here. So North will have both LON1 and LON2. North2 as well will have LON1 and LON2, the OSS platform. And space for our lab, which again might be linked to if we're moving office, we might move our lab into Telehouse instead of building another expensive lab in an office space. PI will continue to stay available in all of the Telehouse sites, so no change there. Not really any change for members. So the commercial agreements really have us covered that independent of where you are, it doesn't really make a difference. So I mentioned pretty much all of that. So Q1, Q2, start definitely in Q1, depending a lot on the LON1 plans and how that fits into the rest of it. A little bit similar, definitely smaller scale compared to Telehouse, since clearly Telehouse is the largest sites that we have, is Equinix in Slough, that we call internally EQ4. We currently have two different areas in Equinix where we have the equipment. They're both in London 4. And the network is a bit split between it. The original racks that we had have some of the LON1 edge routers, well, basically as edge 1, and the LON2 equipment, and then we have a separated rack which has the 100 gig members on LON1. That was always intended to be a temporary solution until we come up with an agreement with Equinix to give us a larger space to complete and do the setup properly. So we have that agreement, and we have racks allocated. They're actually in LON6 instead of LON4. And the plan is going to be that everything that's LON1 will move into LON6. This doesn't sound confusing at all, does it? So the Juniper LAN is going to move into LON6, and the LON2 edge core IP and fusion network is going to stay in the existing racks in LON4. And which will mean both of them we will have space if we need to grow if necessary. In order to do the migration, there's some dependencies on the Telehouse work, since once we do some of the migrations in Telehouse, that's going to free up additional edge routers, MX960s, that we can then redeploy in Equinix to make to parallel build the new sites and move members over as we go along. And that's pretty much all of the updates I have. From here on, I'm going to hand it over to Flemming, who's going to cover LON2, LON1, and our plans for next year.
So thank you. So first thing, pretty hot off the press, was a LON2 POC that we've been conducted. It was over the last 2 weeks. If I fall asleep during the social tonight, you can blame the jet lag, not overindulgence, I promise. We've basically done another POC with IP and Fusion and Edge Core. And the reason is that we deployed with a dedicated branch of the software. We moved off from the mainline branch so we could do a lot of prototypes with our software without impacting software for other customers. But the intent was always to merge the two. So we're there. We both want to merge the branches, but we have a criteria. We want the mainline branch to be at least as good as our branch. We don't want to do a migration and lose stuff. The results of the POC, unfortunately, it's not quite there. But most features are actually as good and better. So it's not, you don't have me going really depressed about this. The nothing worse was actually quite a high standard. I actually believe you should set high standards, so I'm not going to defend that decision. We set the high standard that nothing got worse in the transition. And there's a couple of things. We saw occasionally a hit on traffic restoration after failure that wasn't as good as the pre-merge, and also the 100 gig switch behaves a little less nicely in case of convergence. The first one, it's still a lot better than the old LON2. It's just not as good as what we have now. They haven't quite got to the root cause of it because it doesn't happen every time. And as I said, we only finished last week. The other one on the 100 gig, they understand where it is. It was something they knew they were going to have to do at some stage, and us picking it up has moved it forwards. But it involves changing a few things on queuing, and that involves a lot of testing on their part. So there'll be a fair amount of work on their end. But in summary, the key questions we have is, would we deploy the mainline? And the answer would be yes. If this was a version we were evaluating for the migration, based on this POC, the recommendation I would give is yes, go ahead. The choice we have now is where we're on a good software branch and we have the migration. Do we need to migrate now? No. We expect the fixes, ideally next release, which will be January. There's also some netconf improvements that we anyway want, so we wouldn't want to do 2 upgrades anyway. So very likely we will be doing the migration in Q1 2019. Did I say netconf? Yes, another decision that was made to accelerate the project, and that was back in September time when we were really working on hardening the software, was to focus on the CLI and the base behavior and the testing we've been doing on netconf, which was more on the prototyping stage as opposed to the hardening. We didn't have the human resource bandwidth to really focus on both. We didn't immediately pick that up. After the migration, everyone took a couple of weeks relaxing. When we picked it up, we found there was 1 or 2 cases that didn't work as well, and it's combinations of changes on connection ports that are not hitless, and a provisioning activity for one member could potentially affect another member if we do it in the wrong order. Our NAPOM do one global push means we can't guarantee we wouldn't do things in the wrong order. So we could work around the limitation based on us changing the order, but far better approach. We've told IPN Fusion, by the way, you didn't think anyone could do all those things at the same time, but if you're pushing more than one provisioning activity at once, which is what NAPOM can do, then yes, we can do it, and sorry, you need to work around it. So we don't need to, so the goal is not to work around the limitation, it's to get them to allow us to still do the crazier things that NAPOM might want to do, and we're hoping to get that again in the Q1 next year release. So that's it for LON2. Still can report good, stable behavior, so there's no, it's not that we suddenly are getting nervous results, that we have a big push. We're just trying to grow the platform now that it's reached a level of maturity. Next agenda item, London, the 2019 plans. EVPN. We've done it on LON2. We've learned a fair bit over LON2. We've always wanted to do it on LON1. We just had a few software delivery pieces of the jigsaw that wasn't there. So feature-wise, we want to keep up with LON2 as far as what we offer and proxy op and flood reduction, but we're keeping MPLS transport. We're not going for EVPN over VXLAN. We're pretty good at traffic engineering, the LON1 network, so that is remaining. But we can get rid of the scripts that occasionally ping members so that if we have unidirectional flows, we don't have to prime the CAM tables in the gaps. EVPN will make sure that goes away. So, and generally with EVPN we have less flooding. And yes, this time we are keeping the flow data. So we're doing a major upgrade with Juniper, but we're not going to remove the flow data. And that was one of the pieces of the jigsaw that we needed to get in place before we could start the migration. Oops, I think the transition didn't quite work. So the other thing we're doing with Juniper is we're deploying next generation high-density chassis. It's based on the QFX chassis design, but we're using that for MX cards, and that will give us quite a big increase in density and is future-proofing the deployment. It doesn't help with that line already there. It's going to be 400 gig ready, so that's being ready for the transition. Actually, no, it's about the cost base. If we come in as far as what we were doing on Juniper historically, we were building up a lot of legacy equipment. The growth on the MPC7, because of the cost of the silicon design, is not the best evolution for us. The key bit is we can retire some very old equipment that we fully depreciated, so the previous approaches were fully depreciated, we might as well continue using it. It's free. But as I think it was Simon that brought it up at the Room 101 presentation, support is still an ongoing issue, and if you still have it switched on, you still have to pay support. Even though the equipment is no longer leading edge, the support cost is based on the list price. So we're hoping to retire not our newly purchased equipment, those we're going to continue sweating, and I think, no, sorry, one bullet too early. We're not going to be retiring our new equipment, but we'll be moving along, and some of the older equipment that's quite expensive from a support point of view will be replacing by equipment with a much lower support cost, and also offering a lower cost base for future growth. But there is a big chassis, a lot more scale out instead of scale up, which means upgrades will be a lot faster, and 100 gig turn-ups should be a lot faster than our present methodology. And okay, that was a bit I was coming. We are keeping the expensive MPC7s. It's not a case that we're replacing the capital we've been spending the last 3 years. It's more the older equipment that we'll be replacing with something that's more modern support base. The catch, unfortunately there's one. It runs 18.2 R1 S4, so that's the 4th maintenance release they've got from that, and it's on brand new hardware, and EVPN is a new protocol. Don't worry, we're nervous too. Second POC, schedule is Juniper, starting next week. We're going to give the same due diligence to the software. The lessons learned we've had as far as validating LON2, lessons learned we've had from bringing out the PTX. So if you do see the software version, be aware we're not taking this lightly. That's the reason we're putting in the effort, and why we're not just jumping full-heartedly forwards. Yeah. POC schedule from next week, as I said. Actually, before the update, the bit that I wanted to link in to what Mike was saying as far as that affecting Telehouse North, what we don't want to do is either migrate by moving all of Telehouse North to another building and commission it in the middle of the night. That would be, considering the size of a PTX, that would be a challenging activity. So what we're going to do is the new equipment will deploy it in the new site, and we'll then migrate the members to the new site, which then release the equipment that we can deploy into Equinix. So the migration from Telehouse West to North 2 will essentially be based on us deploying the new MX10K directly into the new site, and then retiring the PTX from Telehouse West and redeploying the MXs from West to either North 2 or Equinix. So that's the dependency that Mike was referring to. The other part that we're doing is, like any network, we're growing. We've been tracking the cost of optical transport. And actually on the budget, with the MX10K changing our cost base, with LON2 new cost base, actually on budgets from 2020, because the price compression of transponder base and coherent optics isn't quite as fast, it could, depending on which way the market goes, be our single biggest CapEx line item from 2020 if we didn't change something. So we're looking at using TWDM QSFPs. They're the Inphi colors, or color Z. So it's PAM4 based, 4 different levels. They're a little bit complicated to use again. They have a negative power budget. You put them back to back and they say, sorry, RX level too low. it doesn't come up. They're quite dispersion sensitive. 2-3 kilometers, fine, but anything above that, you really need to get the dispersion compensation right. In addition, they're quite sensitive to signal to noise, so you put the wrong amplifiers and you will be pushing FEC to the limit or even get significant errors. And what we've learned is we've got a very good networking team that are very good at doing network. They're not a layer 1 engineering team, and we could try continuing investing on training, and each time there's personnel churn, retrain everyone, but it's something that you only touch once every 6 months, 9 months, so it doesn't stay fresh until either you get a page in the middle of the night or you're actually in the middle of the project. So we kind of realized it's not our area of expertise, so we brought in external help, which is SmartOptics. They generate smart muxes. I forgot about that animation. I have to do it. So we basically are trying to use them, and now I can use it properly, to make those problems disappear. I'm sorry, I had to do that. So they deploy smart muxes that take care of layer 1 for us. They basically balance all the channels so that everything is at exactly the right level going into the amplifier, varies the amount of gain you have on the amplifier, measures the length of the fiber, sets a correct dispersion compensation, and reports everything to the user. But beyond all the intelligence, a really nice thing is, apart from the fact you plug them in, they look and behave like a passive mux. You plug the channels onto the right port, and they just come up. We've tested them, and it seems to be, as they say, it just works. And we've tested them in our existing LON1 equipment. We've been working quite closely and actually had a call this morning with Juniper where they were tested for us. And they've been testing previously, but for us they gave us a demo on the MX10K, so our future equipment. We've been testing them on LON2. There's a little bit of software development, but they've got that, again, expecting to have that in the Q1 release. So everything shows that that should be ready in time for deployment next year. And that's my half of the presentation. So I suppose I'll invite Mike back up for questions on either us.
Any questions? Anyone? No? Okay. Thank you very much.